Is that all you've got? Tyler sneered as he pushed Ethan against the cold metal of the playground fence. Ethan's hands were trembling, but he stayed silent, eyes cast down. Around them, the group of kids snickered, egging Tyler on. Ethan's shirt was torn, his face flushed from the humiliation, but he said nothing. It wasn't the first time he had been picked on, and somehow, he knew it wouldn't be the last. The mocking laughter echoed in his ears, a sound he had come to hate. But just as Tyler took a step closer, ready to make another cruel remark, a voice broke through the noise. "Leave him alone." The voice was calm, steady, and it carried an authority that made everyone pause. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He knew that voice. Jack Matthews, the old man who lived down the street, stood at the edge of the park. At first glance, Jack didn't look like much. He was older, his face weathered by time, his hair thinning. He walked with a cane and rarely spoke to anyone. But there was something about him, something in the way he carried himself that commanded respect. Tyler, on the other hand, was all swagger, a teenager who thought he ruled the world. He couldn't understand why this old man, someone who didn't even seem to care about what was going on, was stepping into his territory. "What's the old man going to do?" Tyler laughed, turning to face Jack. "You here to teach me a lesson?" Jack didn't flinch. He simply walked over to where Ethan was standing, his eyes locked on Tyler. There was no anger in Jack's gaze, only calm. "You don't know who you're messing with, kid," Jack said quietly. "This isn't about being tough. It's about knowing when to stand your ground." Tyler chuckled, but there was a nervous edge to it now. He crossed his arms and looked Jack up and down. "And what do you know about standing your ground, old man?" Jack smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who was amused. It was the smile of someone who had seen things, someone who had lived through a lifetime of challenges and had come out on top. "More than you think." He didn't raise his voice, didn't get aggressive. He simply spoke with a quiet certainty that made Tyler hesitate. The other kids, watching from a distance, began to shift uncomfortably. Ethan stood there, confused and awestruck. This old man, who had never said more than a few words to him, was standing up for him, without any hesitation. Tyler opened his mouth to retort, but the words seemed to stick in his throat. For a moment, he felt unsure, almost as if something deeper was being challenged. He didn't know what it was, but he felt it. Jack took another step forward, not in anger, but in calm defiance. "You don't have to fight every battle with your fists. Some battles are won with your words, with your choices." Tyler's bravado faltered. The laughter from the group of kids faded as they began to realize that this wasn't a confrontation they were used to. Jack wasn't backing down, but he wasn't escalating things either. He was teaching them all a lesson they didn't know they needed. Ethan watched, feeling something stir inside him. The old man's words weren't just for Tyler. They were for him, too. He didn't have to accept being pushed around. He didn't have to stay silent when he was wronged. Slowly, Tyler dropped his arms, looking at Jack with a mixture of confusion and begrudging respect. "Whatever," Tyler muttered, turning away. The other kids followed suit, not daring to challenge the unexpected authority that Jack had just revealed. Jack turned to Ethan, giving him a small, encouraging nod. "You did good. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Ethan blinked, still processing what had just happened. He had always thought that standing up for himself meant fighting back, but Jack had shown him another way. He smiled, a quiet, determined smile that told Jack everything he needed to know. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was learning to stand his ground. And that was a lesson that would stick with him forever. "Ethan, you okay?" Jack's voice was quiet but firm as he stood beside the boy, watching as Tyler and the others walked off, their heads down, their typical bravado gone. Ethan was still frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. He'd never expected a stranger, someone like Jack, to stand up for him. The old man's calmness, his quiet confidence, had shifted the balance of power in that moment. "Yeah, I'm good," Ethan replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He was still stunned. by how easily Jack had handled the situation. It wasn't just that Jack had intervened, it was the way he'd done it. No yelling, no threats, just a presence, a quiet strength that left Tyler speechless. "You don't have to fight to win, Ethan," Jack said, as they began walking down the street together. "Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is just stand tall when everyone expects you to fall." Ethan glanced up at Jack, his mind racing. "But how do you just do that? I mean, they were laughing at me. It's not like I could ignore it." Jack nodded slowly, as if he understood exactly what Ethan was feeling. "It's not easy, but sometimes, the more they push, the more you have to stay grounded. They'll only win if you let them make you doubt yourself." Ethan thought about this as they walked in silence. The afternoon sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. It felt like the world had shifted just a little. He had stood his ground today, but it wasn't like the other times when he'd just gotten angry and fought back. Today, he had stood his ground with his mind, with his choice to stay calm. And it had worked. "You think I did all right?" Ethan asked, his voice unsure. "You did more than all right," Jack replied. "You showed them that they can't just push people around. That's not something you can teach in a classroom or on a sports field. That's something you learn in life." Jack paused, looking down at Ethan, his eyes softening. "You've got more strength in you than you realize." They reached the end of the street, where Jack stopped and turned to face Ethan. "Remember, kid, being tough isn't about how much you can hit. It's about how much you can take and still keep moving forward." Ethan nodded slowly, feeling a surge of something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. Hope that maybe things didn't have to be this hard. That maybe, with a little more belief in himself, he could handle whatever came his way. "Thanks, Jack," Ethan said, his voice a little steadier now. "You've taught me something." Jack smiled, giving Ethan a small pat on the shoulder. "You taught yourself, kid. I just helped you see it." As they parted ways, Ethan walked home with his head held just a little higher, the weight of the world on his shoulders feeling just a little lighter. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure: he wasn't going to let anyone push him around anymore. The next day at school, Ethan felt different. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible, but it was there. He stood a little taller, held his head a little higher. The whispers and stares he used to dread didn't bother him as much. The kids who had once made him feel invisible now seemed to be aware of his presence, but it wasn't the same fearful awareness he had grown used to. It was something else, something that made him feel like maybe, just maybe, he had the power to change how things went. As he walked through the hallway, he saw Tyler again, this time with his usual group of friends. They eyed him, but there was no mocking this time. Tyler gave him a brief, almost reluctant nod before turning away. Ethan wasn't sure what it meant, but it didn't matter. What mattered was that he wasn't shrinking anymore. In class, things were different too. The teacher, Mrs. Grayson, asked him a question, and instead of feeling his stomach tighten with nerves, he answered confidently, his voice steady. For the first time, he realized how much of his life had been lived in fear of others' opinions. It wasn't just Tyler and his friends. It was everyone. The constant worrying about what people thought had kept him stuck in the background, always avoiding attention, always retreating. But not anymore. That afternoon, Ethan met up with Katie and Jaden at the park again. They had been texting him all morning, asking if he was still planning to come out. "You good?" Jaden asked, tossing a ball between his hands. Katie looked at him with a hopeful expression. "We didn't see you much today. What's going on?" Ethan smiled, feeling a bit of that old nervousness slip away. "I'm good," he said, the words coming out with a confidence he hadn't known he had. "I'm good. I've been thinking." Katie raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About how I've been acting. I used to just hide, you know? Just try to make myself invisible so people wouldn't mess with me. But it's not working. I'm not invisible anymore." Jaden grinned. "So, what?" You're gonna start standing up for yourself? Ethan nodded. Yeah. I guess so. He paused, glancing around the park as he took in the familiar sights. It was the same place, the same people, but everything felt different now. You guys should try it too. It's not easy, but it's worth it. Katie and Jaden exchanged a look, then smiled. You're already doing it, man, Jaden said, throwing him a playful punch on the arm. Katie added, yeah, who would have thought? Ethan, the guy who always kept his head down, now telling us to step up. Ethan laughed, the sound light and free. For the first time, he felt like he was part of something bigger. Not just a kid who had to take whatever came his way, but someone who could shape his own story. Later that evening, as he sat on the front porch, watching the sky change colors as the sun set, Ethan thought about Jack's words. Being tough isn't about how much you can hit. It's about how much you can take and still keep moving forward. Those words had stuck with him, and they made him feel stronger than he ever had before. He realized now that being strong wasn't about fighting back against every single person who made him feel small. It was about choosing when to fight, when to walk away, and when to stand tall no matter what anyone else thought. Ethan didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid to face it. He wasn't afraid of the bullies, of the challenges that might come. He was ready. And that made all the difference. The next week, Ethan woke up feeling different. It wasn't just the quiet confidence he'd started to feel, it was the knowledge that things were changing, that he was no longer the kid who just kept his head down and let life pass him by. He walked to school that morning with a purpose. It wasn't the same nervous shuffle he had taken before. This time, he was walking like he knew exactly where he was going. When he reached the school gates, he saw Tyler and his group of friends hanging out near the entrance. They didn't immediately notice Ethan, but when they did, there was no mocking smile on Tyler's face. There was no smirk, no laugh at his expense. Instead, Tyler gave him a quick nod, just a small acknowledgement, before turning back to his friends. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Ethan didn't feel the usual wave of shame that came with passing Tyler. Instead, he felt a quiet strength, like his mere presence had shifted the balance of things. As the day went on, Ethan found himself thinking more and more about Jack's words. It was still hard to believe that the old man had seen something in him, something he hadn't even noticed himself. But Jack was right, strength wasn't about how many times you could swing your fists. It was about how you handled the hard moments, how you kept going when everything inside of you told you to give up. That afternoon, Ethan decided to take action. He had noticed that some of the younger kids in his class were still dealing with the same issues he used to face, the teasing, the laughter, the exclusion. It wasn't right, and he wasn't going to stand by and watch it happen. He caught up with Katie and Jaden after school, both of them laughing and joking as they walked out of the building. Hey, do you guys notice the little kids in our grade? They're getting picked on, Ethan said, the words coming out more confidently than he expected. Katie and Jaden stopped, looking at him, waiting for him to continue. I want to do something about it. We can help them. Show them what we learned. Katie's eyes widened. You want to step in and stop it? How? I'm not sure yet, Ethan replied, but I know that we can't just stand around and let it keep happening. We've got to show them that they don't have to be afraid. That they can stand up for themselves. Jaden grinned, slapping Ethan on the back. Man, I love it. Let's do this. The next day, they gathered the younger kids at recess, telling them about the importance of standing up for themselves. They weren't pretending to have all the answers, but they were offering something important, hope, and a sense of empowerment. As they spoke, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He was teaching them what Jack had taught him: you don't have to fight back with fists to be strong. Sometimes, the best way to fight back is with your voice, your choices, and your courage. The group of younger kids started to listen, some of them nodding in agreement. For the first time, Ethan realized he wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. He was standing up for others too. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and for Ethan, that was all that mattered. As the bell rang and everyone went back to class, Ethan felt something shift inside of him. He wasn't just the kid who had been picked on anymore. He was the one who helped change things. And for the first time in his life, he was proud of who he was becoming. The next few weeks passed, and Ethan began to feel a shift not only in himself but also in the way others saw him. At school, he was no longer the quiet kid who kept to himself. He had become someone others turned to for guidance. It wasn't that he was suddenly popular, but there was something in his demeanor that made people respect him. He had found his voice, and with it, a new sense of power. One afternoon, after school, Ethan walked through the park where he had met Jack for the first time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the ground. As he walked, he saw a group of younger kids gathered around. They were standing by the swings, looking uncertain, glancing around as if waiting for something. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the look on their faces. It was the same one he had worn so many times before. The feeling of being on the edge, of being scared to take that first step. Without thinking, Ethan approached them, his steps confident. "Hey," he said, his voice clear and steady. "You guys okay?" The kids looked up, a bit startled at first, but then they recognized him. We're just waiting," one of them said, fidgeting. Ethan smiled, feeling that familiar sense of calm that had settled in him recently. "Waiting for what?" he asked, his tone easy. "For someone to stand up to Tyler and his friends," another kid said, his voice quiet but full of frustration. Ethan nodded. He had heard this story before. Tyler and his group of friends still ruled the park, still made kids feel small. But now, Ethan knew better than to just wait for someone else to act. He wasn't going to be that person anymore. "I'll help you," Ethan said, surprising even himself. The kids looked at each other, unsure. "You really think you can do something about it?" one of them asked. Ethan's smile widened, and he gave a small shrug. "I'm not going to sit around and wait. If we all stand up together, things can change." The other kids exchanged glances, and slowly, one by one, they nodded. It was a small victory, but it was theirs. They weren't just waiting for change, they were going to make it happen. That evening, Ethan found himself walking home with Katie and Jaden, feeling a quiet pride inside. He had made a difference in someone's life, even if it was just a small group of kids. As they walked, Katie glanced over at him. "You know, I think you've changed more than you realize," she said. "You're not the same Ethan who used to hide in the corner." Ethan looked over at her, his thoughts drifting back to that moment when Jack had spoken to him. "I think I've just figured out what it means to stand up for myself," he said, his voice steady and sure. Jaden grinned, giving him a thumbs up. "Yeah, man. You've definitely got the right idea now." As the three of them walked down the street, the sun sinking lower behind them, Ethan realized that it wasn't just about standing up to bullies. It was about standing up for what was right. It was about using your voice, your actions, and your heart to make the world a little better, one step at a time. The weeks went by, and things started to feel different for Ethan. It wasn't just at school anymore. It was everywhere. He began noticing things in himself that had always been there, hidden under the weight of fear and doubt. The quiet confidence Jack had shown him, the strength to stand tall without needing to fight back, it had become a part of him. One afternoon, after a week of helping out the younger kids in the park, Ethan found himself sitting on the same bench where he had first met Jack. The old man hadn't been around for a few days, and Ethan had missed his quiet presence. It was just a bench, just a spot in the park, but somehow, it felt like the center of everything that had changed for him. As he sat there, Katie and Jaden joined him, both of them still buzzing with excitement from their latest project, organizing a neighborhood cleanup. "We've really got to start planning for the next one," Katie said, pulling out her phone to check her calendar. "We'll make sure it's bigger. More people, more projects." Jaden grinned. "I can already see the looks on everyone's faces when they realize they've been caught up in something good." Ethan smiled but stayed quiet for a moment, just watching the kids playing in the distance. His thoughts drifted to Jack, wondering if he would ever come back to the park. Wondering if he had made enough of a difference. "You good, Ethan?" Jaden asked, nudging him with his elbow. "Yeah," Ethan replied, snapping back to the present. "I've just been thinking about how much everything's changed. I mean, I used to just hide. Avoid everything. Now I feel like I can actually do something." Katie looked at him, her eyes softening. "You've done a lot more than you think, you know. You've helped all of us. You're the reason we're actually getting things done around here." Ethan didn't know what to say. It was strange to hear someone say that, to hear that his actions had made a difference. He was just doing what he felt was right. But maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone really needed to do what's right, even when it's hard. "It's just the beginning," Ethan said quietly. "We've got to keep it going. We've got to show everyone that we're not just a bunch of kids who get pushed around. We've got to show them that we can stand up for ourselves, and for each other." "You're right," Jaden said, his voice full of conviction. "And we will." They sat there for a few more minutes, just talking about the plans they had for the future. There was still a lot to do, still so much that needed to change. But for the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't afraid of what was coming. He wasn't afraid of standing up. He wasn't afraid of being who he was. He wasn't sure where the road ahead would take him, but one thing was certain, he was no longer the scared kid who used to hide. He was someone who could make things happen. And he was ready to keep going. A few months had passed, and the changes in Ethan were more evident than ever. Not just in the way he carried himself, but in the way others started to see him. He wasn't the quiet kid who blended into the background anymore. He had become someone others could look to for guidance, someone who had learned the value of standing up for what was right. One afternoon, as he walked home from school, he noticed a group of kids gathered around the park. He recognized them immediately, the same kids who had once looked to him as the target of their jokes and taunts. But today, something was different. They were talking to each other, laughing, and sharing ideas, their faces lit with the kind of confidence Ethan had seen in himself not too long ago. The realization hit him hard. He had made a difference. It wasn't just about standing up for himself anymore. It was about teaching others to do the same. And that felt like a victory all on its own. As he approached the group, they noticed him, and for a split second, Ethan felt a wave of old nerves wash over him. But this time, it wasn't fear. It was pride. They weren't staring at him like they used to, waiting for him to shrink into himself. They were looking at him with a sense of respect. "Hey, Ethan," one of the kids, Alex, called out. "We've been talking about what you said the other day. About standing up for ourselves. You think you could show us how to deal with it when the bullies come around?" Ethan smiled, the weight of the question hanging in the air. He had never thought of himself as a teacher, but here he was, being asked to lead, to show others what he had learned. "It's not about fighting back," he said, his voice steady, "it's about not letting them control how you feel. You can't let someone else's words make you feel small. You've got to own your space, your thoughts, your actions." He paused, looking at each of them. "And sometimes, that means just standing there and saying, 'I'm not going anywhere.'" The kids nodded, taking in every word. They didn't need to be told how to punch or how to fight, they needed to know that they didn't have to take the cruelty others tried to push on them. They needed to know that they were strong enough to handle it on their own. As Ethan spoke, he felt the weight of his own journey settle on his shoulders. He wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. He was standing up for all of them. And that felt like the most powerful thing in the world. Later that evening, as he sat down to do his homework, Ethan thought about what had happened. He wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, he had stopped being the scared kid. He had stopped hiding. Now, he was someone who was ready to face whatever came his way, someone who knew that standing up wasn't about confrontation. It was about courage. And courage wasn't about being fearless, it was about being willing to face your fears, one step at a time. It was a Saturday afternoon when Ethan found himself back at the park, sitting on the same bench where he had first felt the shift within himself. He wasn't sure why, but something about the park felt different today. Maybe it was the warm sunlight filtering through the trees, or maybe it was because he had become someone who didn't just observe life happening but actively participated in it. As he sat there, his thoughts wandered back to that moment when he had first stood up to the bullies. That moment had felt like a turning point in his life, and it had been. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just about standing up in one instance, it was about being consistent. It was about choosing courage every day, even when it was hard, even when it felt like he wasn't enough. Ethan leaned back on the bench, looking out at the park where kids were running and playing. It was the same park he had always known, but now it felt like he was seeing it with new eyes. He was no longer the kid hiding in the shadows, waiting for the world to change. He was the one who was going to make the change. Just as he was lost in thought, he heard footsteps approaching. He turned to see Jaden walking over, his usual wide grin on his face. "Hey man, what's up?" Jaden asked, sitting down next to him. Ethan smiled. "Just thinking." "About what?" Jaden asked, leaning back and looking up at the sky. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his thoughts into words. "I've been thinking about how easy it is to just give in. How easy it is to let fear control you. But then, I remember what we've been doing, what I've been doing. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Jaden nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yeah, man, you've come a long way. I've seen the way people look at you now. They respect you. It's like you found your voice, you know." Ethan looked down at his hands for a moment, processing Jaden's words. "I don't know if I've found it yet, but I'm getting there. I've realized that standing up for myself is just the beginning. It's not just about me. It's about helping others find their strength too." Jaden smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "That's exactly it. You're not just changing yourself. You're changing this whole place." Ethan felt a rush of gratitude, not just for Jaden's words but for everything he had learned along the way. He had come to understand that real strength wasn't just about overcoming fear, it was about facing it head-on and choosing to be better, day by day. As they sat there in silence, Ethan realized that he wasn't just waiting for things to get better. He was making them better. And that was a feeling he would never give up. He wasn't the same person he used to be. He was someone who stood up for himself, for his friends, and for what was right. And as long as he kept moving forward, he knew that he was on the right path. The months passed, and Ethan found himself standing at a crossroads in his life. Things had changed, he had changed. What started as a simple shift in how he saw himself had rippled through every part of his life. He wasn't the same kid who had kept his head down, waiting for things to get better. He was now the one making things better. And somehow, it felt like he had only just begun. One afternoon, after a meeting with the younger kids in the park, Ethan found himself sitting with Katie and Jaden again. They were making plans for another community event, this time to raise awareness about bullying in their school. As they sat on the grass, surrounded by the laughter of children, Ethan thought about the long road he had traveled. It wasn't just about standing up to bullies anymore. It was about helping others find the courage to do the same. "You know," Ethan said, glancing at his friends, "I never thought I'd be the one leading something like this. I used to be the one hiding in the back, waiting for someone else to do it." Jaden smiled, nudging him with his elbow. "Well, now you're the one showing people how it's done. It's like you've unlocked something in yourself, man." Katie nodded in agreement. "And you've unlocked something in all of us too. We've all been watching you, learning from you. You don't even realize how much you've changed things." Ethan looked down at his hands, the weight of their words settling in. He had never thought of himself as a leader, but now, he saw how much his actions had inspired others. He wasn't just standing up for himself, he was showing others that they could stand tall too. As the event came closer, Ethan worked harder than ever to make sure it would be a success. He was determined to leave a lasting impact, not just on the kids who were already standing up for themselves, but on the ones who were still struggling to find their voice. When the day of the event arrived, the park was filled with parents, teachers, and students, all gathered to support the cause. Ethan stood at the front, surrounded by his friends, ready to speak. The crowd had gathered, and he felt a small knot of nerves in his stomach, but it wasn't the same kind of fear he had once felt. This time, he was ready. He stepped forward, took a deep breath, and began. "We're here today because we believe that no one should ever feel small. No one should ever feel like they don't have a voice," he said, his voice steady and strong. "We're here because we know that standing up to bullying isn't just about stopping the bad stuff. It's about creating a world where everyone feels safe to be themselves." As he spoke, he saw the faces in the crowd nodding in agreement. He saw the younger kids looking up at him, inspired by his words. For the first time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. This wasn't just an event, it was the culmination of everything he had worked for, everything he had learned. And it wasn't just his journey anymore. It was the journey of everyone who had joined him along the way. When the event was over, and the crowd began to disperse, Ethan felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had come a long way from the quiet, fearful kid who had once been afraid to stand up for himself. Now, he was someone who stood tall, not just for himself, but for everyone else too. He had learned that strength wasn't about how hard you could hit or how much you could take. It was about the courage to be yourself, to stand up when it mattered, and to help others find the strength to do the same.